15. Welcome back. We return to our candidate interviews now with a Republican challenger to President Trump. William Weld is a former governor of Massachusetts. He ran for vice president on the Libertarian ticket in 2016, and he joins us this morning from Newton, Massachusetts. Governor Weld, welcome to America in One Room.
Thank you so much, Great to be with you. Hello, Dallas.
Our groups have come up with questions for the candidates. We're going to begin with George from Group 4. George, where are you? There we go.
Group 4. Good morning, Governor. We talked a lot yesterday about climate change and the environment. And one of the questions that we wanted to understand was, do you believe that the politicians in Washington who are climate deniers actually believe that, or do they say that for political or self-interest purposes?
No, I don't think they believe it. It's impossible to believe. They must be saying it just to go along with Mr. Trump. I'll tell you, though, I was at a climate policy forum with the Democrats yesterday in Washington. And one thing that struck me is the Democratic plans are all about inputs. This is how much I'm going to spend, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. And what we really need is to focus on the outcome, which is taking action to make sure that the temperature increase between now and 2050 is less than 1.5 degrees centigrade. And the only way to do that is to put a price on carbon, which would have to be done by Congress or by the president under some sort of executive authority to make sure that the market would take care of getting carbon out of the atmosphere.
Thanks a lot for your question. Randall is next. Randall, good to have you with us.
Why is Medicare prohibited from negotiating drug prices? For example, life-saving things like insulin.
Yeah, Medicare should no longer be prohibited from negotiating on behalf of the American people. These hearings in front of the House involving Big Pharma, where they were asked the question, how come you charge 3 times as much in the United States as you do in Germany for the exact same drug? And they said, it's complicated, carry the 4, divide by 3, it's really complex. It's not complex. And I think the government has the right to get involved here on behalf of elders in particular, getting murdered by prescription drug prices.
Thanks for your question. Matthew is next from Group 7. Matthew.
Thank you. Welcome. My name is Matt. What is the federal minimum wage intended to support, and specifically, what necessities should it provide for?
Well, I think the federal minimum wage should make sure that nobody has to live in the shadows. You know, I spent a lot of time when I was in office worrying about a person who has a job paying $29,000, $32,000 a year, and 2 or 3 kids at home, has to support his or her family. And it's just very tough to make odds meet. And a person like that has no bargaining power, no leverage with his or her employer. If the employer says your health benefits are cut in half, they can't say, the hell with you, I'm going to go get another job, because they can't get another job because they don't have the skill sets. So I don't think anybody should be in that position. And one of the first things I did when I got into office was to greatly increase the earned income tax credit, which is a way of fueling cash to the working poor. And I think the federal minimum wage and the federal tax code in general should be put at such a level that there's no risk that the door to the middle class, everybody's aspiration, will be slammed in the face of the working poor. That's the purpose of both the tax code should be and the minimum wage.
You know, Governor, one of the other candidates participating in our America in One Room program was here yesterday, Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado. And he drew a distinction between high cost places in the country and lower cost places in the country, and said a one-size-fits-all minimum wage might not be a good idea for low-cost, low-wage areas. Massachusetts, your own home state, is a place where there's sky-high costs in places like Boston and much lower in the western parts of the state. Would a two-tier minimum wage be a good idea?
Yeah, that would not shock my conscience. I mean, there's a lot of states where the minimum wage is $6 and $7. That seems on the low side to me. Yeah, no, I don't think you have to have one size fits all. I think Senator Bennett, as usual, has shown good judgment.
John is with us next from Group 1.
Hey, good morning, Governor. This question from Group 1. Given the controversial nature of the climate change issue, how would you balance the desire of people to retain their personal liberties with the regulatory regime that would be deployed against the climate situation?
Well, putting a price on carbon, the regulatory regime, if you will, just says if you want to put carbon into the atmosphere, you owe us X dollars a ton, either $40 or $50 a ton, or the price is most commonly used. And that's imposed upstream, not on the consumer at all, upstream at the wellhead for oil, at the mine shaft for mining, at the loading dock for LNG being imported. So, and there are other categories of emitters, animal husbandry, of ruminant animals, which means grass-chewing animals. That's a big contributor, and they would pay their share as well, not as much as the fossil fuel companies, but just based on the amount of carbon going into the atmosphere. It doesn't involve individuals at all. And so then those emitters of carbon, producers of carbon, would decide, given that price, how much they want to produce, and probably they'd produce less. So that's how we would get to a situation where we would achieve the objective of the global temperature. And that is the only objective that the UN framework directs the participating countries in the Paris Accord to achieve. So it wouldn't involve individuals being threatened in their lives. It doesn't involve, our economy grinding to a halt or anything like that. It all takes place automatically where the market, the price of carbon, the market would respond to the price signal set by $40 a ton or $50 a ton. And actually, in terms of regulatory regime, you'd be able to cut down on the regulatory regime once a price is imposed on carbon. For example, you'd be able to repeal the federal gas tax and the federal tax on diesel, and there would be hundreds or over $100 billion left to return to the taxpayers to make sure that this is only a fee and not a tax. The government would not keep any of the net money. And that could be used, for example, to give payroll tax relief to the working poor, again, returning to the issue of income inequality in the working poor. I think it could be a win-win-win.
Governor, you might be able to innovate a plant that burns less coal to make electricity, or less natural gas, in fact. You might be able to come up with engines that burn more cleanly and get you more energy per unit of measurement. But it's hard to imagine engineering a cow, since you mentioned ruminant animals, that you can lower emissions from. Is there a disparate impact there?
No, I don't think so. A unit of carbon is a unit of carbon, but some gases are less equal than others. Methane, for example, which President Trump last week said, let's have more methane. Let's not have any regulation on the amount of methane that can be released from landfills. That's just going in the wrong direction. Methane is 35 to 38 times as bad as carbon dioxide in terms of impact on the universe.
Laura is next from Group 19. Laura, good to see you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. My question is on immigration. What would it cost to make the use of E-Verify a requirement nationwide?
So my feeling on immigration is almost the opposite of Mr. Trump's. I think we need more work visas, not less work visas. I spent a lot of time in the western half of the country, in the last cycle. You can't fully populate either the agriculture industry or the construction industry in the western half of the United States without people coming across the border. And, you know, these 11 million people that the president likes to rail about and say they all are dying to be citizens, that's not true. A lot of them are students who have just overstayed their visas. The problem is less severe than the president says. P.S. I don't think those people need to be citizens either. What we could use is a robust guest worker program, which might involve E-Verify, that allows people to come here for 4 months, work the season, whether it's the growing season, the agricultural season, or the construction season, and then go back to, and yes, it would be Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Mexico, but the people really want to send remittances back to their family and then go back there. They don't all want to move to New York City. Are you kidding me? So I think it's a false problem that the president has demonized for his own political purposes to help divide the country.
For your question, we move next to Ed. Ed, go ahead.
Thank you for joining us. To reduce the flow of migrants, is it possible to provide targeted aid to countries of Central America akin to a Marshall Plan and administer it in a manner that is transparent and free of corruption by working with possibly Costa Rica and non-governmental organizations?
Yeah, I would absolutely do that in a heartbeat. You know, it's fashionable to trash foreign aid of any kind, but you know, the problem of people flooding our border for asylum refugees is a U.S. problem. It's our border they're coming to. So why not spend a little bit of money prudently, as you say, with guarantees that could be administered by countries other than Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, to make sure the money doesn't disappear. And it often does. You know, I remember Boris Yeltsin standing on that tank in Red Square in Moscow saying, do not send any more aid to the government of Russia. It will be stolen. So that's a real issue. But you're correct when you say something like the Marshall Plan. And I think your underlying question is, would I allow U.S. funds to be spent there? Yes, I would, because I think it would be in the U.S.'s interest.
Governor, right now in Tijuana, in Juarez, in Nogales, and places like that, people who seek asylum are pooling up. Their requests are not being processed, and of course, they're not being let into the country. Whoever takes over as president, or if the Trump administration continues in office in 2021, that problem's still going to be there. What do you do with all those people who've already left home and are trying to get into the country?
Well, I think the courts recently, maybe even the Supreme Court recently said Mr. Trump is okay on that one. He can say you have to go in your own country first. I mean, the question really is, obviously Mr. Trump wants to abolish the asylum program entirely, and I think that, you know, for the country with Emma Lazarus and the Statue of Liberty, I don't think that's a good signal to send, and I would not go in that direction at all. Mr. Trump is a complete isolationist. And he wants us to hate all other countries. He started with Muslims, and then he went on to Hispanics. He just, you know, a nationalist, which he says he is really someone for whom the most important thing is how much you hate all other countries. A patriot is someone who loves our own country and our fellow citizens in that country. That's not Donald Trump.
We'll go next to Kevin. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Back to the environment. We are concerned about the cost of environmental policy. We'd like to know what exactly did the Paris Agreement commit the United States to, and whether this commitment was different for the United States and other developing countries like India and China.
No, it's not a command and control situation, the Paris Accord. The only responsibilities of the countries who joined it, and there's 197 countries who have joined, only one who is withdrawn, and I think we should get right back in as soon as the new president is inaugurated. All the Paris Accord says is, you have to show us your plan for what you're going to do. And it doesn't say, you know, what the substantive content of that plan has to be. That's going to be hammered out in negotiations among the countries. Right now, the U.S. is the second biggest polluter in the world after China. We're the #1 polluter per capita. And, you know, I've spent a good bit of time over in China, Mongolia, that part of Asia, and the coal plants along the northern border of China all the way out west are just, they're staggeringly numerous. And China absolutely is dependent on that coal now. So that's going to be the toughest negotiation of all, because coal is the worst pollutant of all. And we're going to have to go to China and say, look, folks, you have to stop that. And China is spending 3 times as much as we are on clean energy and renewables. So they're not unaware of which way the future has to go. I was in China shortly before the Beijing Olympics, and you couldn't see across the street in Beijing. And then a couple of weeks before the Olympics, somebody blew a whistle and all the coal plants shut down. And the sky was so beautiful for those Olympics. It was pure blue and you could see forever. That is a command and control economy, and they can do it if they want to. They proved that with the Olympics. So we've just got to get enough carrots and sticks to induce them to go along with that. That's probably the #1 difficult negotiation that I see under the Paris Accord. But it doesn't come from the terms of the Accord. It comes from meeting the 1.5 degrees centigrade level.
Kevin, thanks to you and your group for your question. Nancy is next. Nancy?
Good morning, Governor. I represent Group 11, and we're back to immigration. When we do give aid to those countries that have brutal governments, how would you hold those countries accountable for that money and the distribution of the money the way it was intended?
Well, as I was implying earlier, I wouldn't give it directly to the government or it would disappear. So I have some restrictions on how the money was spent. Someone suggested ask Costa Rica for help, the International Red Cross perhaps. And, you know, you should take a look at similar experiments that have happened in the past, back to and including the Marshall Plan. But it would be tremendously important to make sure that that money reached the people that it was intended to reach.
Thanks for your question. Jordan is next from Group 4.
Good afternoon, Governor Weld. I represent the illustrious Group 4. My group has a question regarding education. With all of the discussion around public school being funded for free in terms of 2-year and 4-year college, what considerations are being made for trade school and putting skilled labor back to work?
Well, vocational and technical education should be a tremendous priority in the United States, much more than it is now. Those are great schools. They have a 0% dropout rate because all the kids in the voc tech schools want to be there. Recently, their aptitude scores, their achievement scores have come up to be on a par with those in quote, regular, close quote, high schools. But voc tech schools are about to get more important. When the U.S. economy sheds 15 or 20% of its jobs because of artificial intelligence and all the technical developments about to hit us in the next 10 years, the solution is for those workers, say take a long-haul trucker, they're going to lose their jobs as soon as driverless trucks come in. But they could get a replacement job with a higher wage if they had technical skills that they don't now possess. And I've looked into this, and it would take 2 courses, 2 years worth of study in one course to give them the technical skills they need to get the higher wage jobs. And I looked into the cost, and it would be a fraction of 1% of a state budget, even without help from the federal government, to make community colleges free to those displaced workers for those courses, not full-time. Nobody like that can afford to take, 6 months or 2 years off to go back to community college. But you could take the courses online. And guess who's going to be delivering them? The voc tech high schools and voc tech sections in college. So I totally agree with the implication of your question that voc tech is coming up in the world in terms of importance. At the end of the day, we're going to have to consider something like the German system, where people can opt in a voc tech direction because the jobs are more certain when they're 14, 15, 16 years old. And I think that could work for the United States, given the dislocation that we're about to suffer as a result of artificial intelligence and robotics and drones and machine learning and driverless vehicles.
Jordan, thanks a lot. Cathany is next. Cathany, what's your question?
Good morning. I'm representing Group 18, and my question is, what is your vision on healthcare, and how will it be funded using private and/or public dollars?
Well, we don't want to squeeze private dollars out of the system. When I was in office, I was a national chairman of the Privatization Council, and I privatized a lot of social services when I was governor and saved hundreds of millions of dollars. And the people who had been held in great big red brick buildings, mentally ill, developmentally disabled, they were like prisons. We closed all of them, and we spun everybody out into the community, no more than 11 to a house, and a staffing ratio of 4 per 11 recipients. They called them inmates when they were previously in these big red brick buildings. This is part of an answer to your question about the healthcare system. We want to make it less intrusive and less dirigiste and nanny status. But beyond that, to look at the Affordable Care Act, it's worth keeping in mind that that act did one very good thing. It got 20 million more people enrolled in the insured population, and that helps a lot with the cost of health care. Cost and quality are the two things you need to worry about when you're designing a healthcare system for the entire country. Broadly, I think there's too much government in the current statute, the current system. It tells everybody they've got to have a Cadillac plan, pay for everything no matter what. No, I think people, individuals and individual families should have the right to have health savings accounts, tax advantage basis, put the money away tax-free, and plan for your own family how much you're going to lay away against a catastrophic healthcare situation. People do that all the time. When they're buying insurance, they either want no deductible because they can't afford to take a hit, or a high deductible to lower the cost of the premium, and people are perfectly capable of making that decision for themselves. So I'd like to see more decisions made by individuals. You know, why can't they buy drugs in Canada? Why can't they buy insurance across state lines? Do I think we should retain private insurance? Absolutely. That's a major buttress of the system. But in general, I think we want to have individuals have more control over their health care and make elections and decisions there, as opposed to the government telling them exactly what they got to do. I'd like to bring it more local, individuals being able to work with a doctor of their own choice or that they know, of course, is very important for all of us.
Cathany, thank